Welcome back, everyone, to Paramystic Christina. I am your host, Christina Bloom, and today I have an amazing woman with me, Leanna Renee Hieber. I met her not long ago, actually. It was last month only that we met, and we met at the Massachusetts Paracon, and she was a keynote speaker and blew me away. She absolutely blew me away. This woman she knows her stuff. She's a historian. She's written some incredible books, one of which we are really going to dive into today. We're going to really dive into A Haunted History of Invisible Women, True Stories of America's Ghosts. Welcome. Welcome, Leanna. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for agreeing to join me. I so appreciate that.
Thank you so much for your time, especially in spooky season, the busy season for all of us. But when you make a connection and have a lovely conversation like we had, and similarly, I could tell that you also know your stuff too, and really care about what you're doing, and
Thank you.
have a gifted approach to it. It's I'll always make time for sort of kindred spirits, as it were. So I'm thrilled to
Yes.
be here, and I'm really thrilled that A Haunted History of Invisible Women is really struck people, and not just women. I mean, it is a book of women's ghost stories. The
Right.
ghosts we focus on are only women, but it's just for people who enjoy actual history, real history, as we try to uncover the truth about some of these kind of hidden histories in a lot of ways. And this is a book that's been out for 2 years now, and we're still talking about it as a new release because it just keeps finding people. And it's the beautiful thing about nonfiction that I found that's different from all of my fiction. I have 16 fiction novels,
Oh,
and
wow.
and
Okay.
I've got quite a backlist of fiction. The nonfiction just has a certain staying power that
Mhm.
that fiction kind of just comes and goes. But
Right.
with Haunted History of Invisible Women, Andrea and I, as my co-author, we're still out there talking about the book at every event, at every appearance, because it still continues to be relevant. Women's issues are still relevant, and the
Very much
discussion
so.
of how do we talk about women? The prompt for this book was, how do we talk about women alive and dead? What are the narratives we're telling? What are the stereotypes that we slot some of these archetypes and tropes into, and what how are the ways in which these ghost stories either subvert those stereotypes or those limitations, or how do they play into them, and thusly the ghost story gets codified? How can we, as readdressing these narratives, how can we change those narratives if they are in fact either false or harmful? That's the question, and that's the stuff that's getting people thinking, and people continue to be talking about it. And because we have so many different stories of and histories in the book, you can kind of sort of hunt and peck through it and see which ones are kind of calling to you.
Right.
And it's perfect for this time of year because you want a good ghost story. Of course, who doesn't want a good ghost story? We're drawn to it.
Right.
But we try to filter that with, okay, and here's a little bit more meat on those spectral bones.
I love it. I love that. There was one line in particular that really struck me, and I don't know if I'll even be able to find it, but it was the line that Leanna's blood boils when this comes up. And actually, right before I read that line, I was experiencing the same thing, like, how dare they? How
Yeah,
dare they? It really just it was like a punch to the gut. I don't know how else to say that.
yeah,
When we're talking about the chapter Industrial Monsters, about um the fire, and correct me if I'm wrong, but where was that? Was that Philadelphia?
it was New York City.
New
So
York
the
City. Okay.
yeah, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911 was the
That's the
worst
one.
industrial accident that our country has seen, and it was entirely preventable. And
Yes.
that is what to this day haunts me. I'm haunted by the actual history that happened. I'm haunted by the fact that of the 146 that died, in some of them burned to death, others jumping from the 8th, ninth, or 10th stories. It was so horrific in every way. 123 of them were women as young as 14 years old in the days before child labor laws. And the fact that child labor has been back in the news right when our book was published was some of the first real some states had relaxed their child labor laws to a point of, of putting children back into very dangerous situations. And we just felt like what a disrespect to all of the children who died in that fire to sort of
Yes.
take our labor laws for granted in that regard. And that's just, it's, we start with quite a punch to the gut, as it were, because it's a topic that we're very, very passionate about, because we want to use it as a cautionary tale, and we want to remind people of
Yes.
sacrifices that people have made so that we have our modern laws to protect us. They're not. This is not a case of overregulation. This is just a case of wanting to make sure people don't get locked in a burning building. Simple as that.
Right. Right. Exactly. Because all of the doors and windows, as far as I know, were
Yeah.
locked.
Yep. Except
Okay.
for one skylight on the 10th floor, and the one upper access that they didn't think to lock down became one of the only ways that some of these mostly women could get out.
Right. It was
And
crazy.
it's, yeah, it's everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong over the course of this very brief fire, that because everything was on the interior made of wood, the exterior was made of stone, which is why the building still exists. So it's steel and stone on the exterior, but the interior was all wooden, and as were the staircases between the floors, which is why you will not ever find wooden staircases in a building ever again because of this. And the outrage was so swift after this happened. And I mean, thousands of New Yorkers watched it unfold. And in fact, when the police were called, the fire marshals were there on the scene immediately. But because New York City skyscrapers in the early days of the 1900s were growing at a faster rate than the budget of the fire department, they actually didn't have ladders that would reach to the top floors. They only reached to the sixth floor of the eighth, ninth, 10th floors, where this building, the clothing company, the clothing factory, was located on these top floors. And can you imagine being with a burning building behind you and you see your potential rescuers and they can't get to you? It it's everything about it is something that I can't ever talk about it without tearing up, and God forbid that I ever desensitized to this. I never want to desensitize to this. I keep this event a raw, open wound in my heart because I owe it to the people that perished in this fire to tell their story, to explain the psychic stain that is on that building, that is on our country's conscience, for this tragedy, because women and girls and predominantly immigrant labor, which was making New York a lot of money and making New York hum and tick and making the city the garment capital of the world at the time. It was making, immigrant labor was making the world go round, especially in New York City. And all of these folks who were just there to try to provide and just to try to make a better life for themselves. And the fact that they had struck with their labor unions to try to explain what was happening in their buildings. They were being locked in. There were fires that had happened. Other deaths had predated this massive death, and the fire chief was explaining to company leaders the values of sprinkler systems. It was the 20th century by this point. Plumbing
Right.
was well established. For a little bit of an investment, you could protect both your workers and all the equipment inside by things like sprinkler systems, by things like working fire escapes, none of which were maintained, and there weren't any laws to say they had to be maintained. So that's all of the things that we take for granted in a modern building, about exits clearly marked, and
Yes.
escape routes, and all of that. All of that was paid for by blood.
Yeah. And that is sad. That is sad in every case that something like that happens. And I had heard kind of an abbreviated version of this
Mhm.
story that did not focus on the woman and child aspect, because that's what history does, right?
Yeah.
And what got me towards the end of that story, and maybe I'm not even towards the end of the story, but that the building is still standing. It's still
Mhm.
being used
Oh, yeah.
by, is it, which university is
New
using it?
York University uses it.
Okay, New York University uses it as a lab.
Yep. Yep. It's a bioengineering and biological sciences lab, and I've been up to those top floors, And I know the history, but you wouldn't see it, you wouldn't know it. You just see lab equipment and people in lab coats and what otherwise looks like a collegiate learning environment. But the we talk about place memory. This is how
Hmm.
we talk about many different types of hauntings in our book, and we talk strongly about place memory, about the idea that
Hmm.
that tragedy left a psychic mark on that building and that space, and anyone who learns the history is moved by being in the presence of that. There is a plaque on the outside of the building, and now, since the book was published, the next year after, so 2023, there was a permanent memorial that's been placed around the outside of the building, and it is when I walked up to it, I just began to weep because it is all of the names of the dead, and they are all etched and cut in metal, and their names shine down on a reflective base around the outside of where most of the people that did jump to their deaths jumped along the side that's, the Washington, Place side of it, and, this is right near Washington Square Park in this sort of Greenwich Village, area of New York City. And so very historic area all around cobblestone streets, and it was something that played out on the streets of New York, and the memorial really lets you know that. You are seeing these names, and they are reflected down below with their names and the ages of their
Wow.
age when they passed, and you see how many teenagers, how many
Oof.
children
That
were
gives
in
me chills.
it is
Oh.
it's one of those things where anyone who is interested in history and trying to live in the present moment of trying to help us make sure we don't repeat our past mistakes, take a pilgrimage to that building to see that memorial and to honor that. Labor law is really important to me.
Yes.
As a member of several unions, I'm a member of of three unions: the Performers Union, Actors Equity, which also was formed because of unsafe working environments in theaters, which in the 19th century also burned. Um,
Yes.
and I'm a member of the Screen Actors Guild and which is allied with the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. So I'm a SAG-AFTRA member as well, and so I've been involved in labor law and in a long time in terms of the history of it. And so this we start on a very difficult subject. I promise your listeners that it's not all doom and gloom. We have some funny ones in there. Andrea, my co-author, wrote a great chapter that I love about Joan Rivers and her haunted apartment. That's hilarious. One of my favorite stories in the book is about Ma Green. She was a steamboat captain in the 19th century, the first woman to get her steamboat pilot's license, and she would win steamboat races. And she was just this incredible character who still haunts the ship she passed away on. And I love that she's this incredible mother of every kind. She mothers her ship, she mothered her passengers, she mothered the sons she had while in the middle of navigating an ice jam, and she was navigating this steamboat, and she was like, "Oh, it's time to give birth." It goes and gives birth, goes back to being a
Oh
captain,
my
and
God.
a lady who did it all.
Wow.
Like, just, a titan, a queen. So Ma Green is in there, and she's from my hometown, just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, so she's from where I'm from, and I was the my hometown pride was fierce, when I was writing that chapter. So I promise you that we try to focus on the range of women's experience, which is wide and vast. We focus on, women who have done bad deeds as well as women who have been heroes, so
I
we
did see
focus on
that.
all of it.
Yeah,
Yep, yep.
I did see that. What was it? Frauds, fakes, and myth making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we also have to talk about the people that took advantage of others,
Yeah.
which, is a tricky topic when you're talking about the importance of something like the spiritualist movement, and I give lectures on this all the time, and you were there for one of them.
I was there for
And,
one of them, and it was
yep,
excellent, by the
thank
way.
you. Thank you. And you have to strike that balance of, yes, this was an important movement. The spiritualist movement was and remains a vital movement, for trying to open up our own sense of being able to communicate with something beyond, and it changed our whole view of how we approached ghost lore, and also just the idea of talking to the dead. It's such an important aspect, but so many people in the 19th century and beyond have used that yearning for that communication in a fraudulent manner. So we have to address that while still lifting up the importance of asking the question of, can we reach out to something that will reach back to us, and that confirmation, and
Right.
how women's rights are inextricably tied to it, because women were seen as a certain amount of spiritual authority in the spiritualist movement. They were allowed to be given platforms. They were allowed to give speeches and hold lectures and write for publications, and ways women really saw the spiritualist movement as a way to promote their ideas of equal rights. And it's looking at the spiritualist movement of parlor seances. You have to also pair it side by side with the history of suffrage. So,
Yes,
so many spiritualists were suffragettes, and vice versa. And I love learning about the ways in which history is all connected. It is all connected,
it
and you
is.
can't look at things outside of their context. You have to look at them in their broader context, and we're doing the best we can with that in this book, while still trying to keep every chapter within a certain amount of word count.
Right, right. Because this book could have easily been volumes. And you did say that there is a second book in the works.
We do have a follow-up. It's
Yeah.
gonna be called America's Most Gothic Haunted History Stranger Than Fiction, and it's gonna be out next fall, also from Kensington. Their nonfiction imprint is called Citadel. But Kensington Books is where we're published. And, we'd thought about doing, more invisible women, more haunted history of these ladies' ghost stories, and our publisher, said something very interesting, which I hadn't considered, because I've been in fiction and writing series fiction for so long.
Right.
They said they didn't want an additional volume to compete with this first one. So it's possible that years from now we may revisit a direct sequel, but they wanted this book to just exist on its own for a while, and then do a follow-up that examines from a similar, looking at the trope and the stereotype angle.
Hmm.
How does Gothic literature influence how ghost stories are told? In the same way, how do our narratives about women influence how we've told these ghost stories? We're unpacking that from a Gothic literature perspective, and we're lifting up things that are truly stranger than fiction, but that then become even more codified in the spectral realm, because they fit into one of those narrative, those storytelling, those urban legend things that gives the story
Yeah.
staying power. So it ends up having almost a life beyond itself, because it's fitting into these prearranged storylines that we know and love and gravitate towards. People love gravitating towards a familiar story, and there's so many recurring themes in ghost lore. So we'll be
Right.
unpacking all of that with some of our favorite weird stories. And it's that one's been fun and interesting, and I've learned a lot, and I've gotten to travel to many different interesting places, and I hope that that also really becomes another discussion point for people to be like, wow, I wanna ask the questions of what's the most Gothic history around me? Because in both of these cases, neither one are these are encyclopedias, nor are they atlases, nor are they a travel guide
Mhm.
necessarily. We're focusing on places that were evocative to us. We're focusing on a curated list of stories. This is not an exhaustive compendium. There are so many more women's stories that we want to keep returning to. Women remain the focus of our work, but not exclusively too in what we do as ghost tour guides, because that's how Andrea and I, as co-authors, um, we worked together because she founded a ghost tour company called Burrows of the Dead, which is New York's top ghost tour company. And her and I were at a um, we were invited to tell ghost stories at a Brooklyn bar, a candlelit environment, and we told our own
Lovely.
ghost stories.
Awesome.
It was so much fun, and I hadn't met her, but I knew I'd heard all this great stuff about Burroughs the Dead as a company, and I
Hmm.
really liked her how she approached, just her own marketing, which was very honest, very open, and very not sensationalized, very true to the history, and she was focusing on the history first, and something that she had said really early on that very much applies to everything that I do, is respect for the dead first and foremost.
Yes,
Um, that's which gets lost in some ghost tourism. Let's be
it
real.
can.
When you're looking at the ghostly tourism angle, that can be very problematic, and so you really have to approach it with respect and care, and not just disaster tourism exploiting the stories of the dead.
Right.
We are inevitably in a difficult environment with this, because yes, we are ghost tour guides. We do participate in the economy of spectral tourism, as it were. But as long as you do it with respect, and as long as you do it by honoring these histories and saying, hi, here's a way in which this historic building can become present for you in a moment because it is currently haunted, even though its residents have long passed. How can that be
Yeah.
of a present important moment to you? So that there's a tension that we have to navigate in everything we do. So I went up to her after we did this ghost story reading, and I said, I do have my tour guide's license. You have to be licensed to be a New York City ghost tour guide, or not just a ghost tour guide, a tour guide of any kind. You have to have a license because it's good to
Yes.
force New Yorkers to go through a licensing process because New Yorkers are famous for bullshit and lovingly famous for that, and will tell you absolutely anything, and we'll just make it a good story. And if you are not in fact tested on which one in fact is the Empire State Building, New Yorkers will just make it up if they don't know. But if you don't know and you're a New Yorker, I worry for you. But all this to say, I had my tour guide's license. I trained and studied for it. The moment I moved to New York City, I knew I wanted to write stories about New York City, and I knew the best way to do that, from having been a tour guide in every other city I ever lived, was you learn about the history by walking its streets. And so I
Yes.
studied very hard, passed that test, started working for different companies, and realized I just basically really the only thing I was interested was haunted history. So I focused in on and went after my dreams, which was to only talk about ghosts when I'm talking about New York history. I do love architecture too, so everybody gets a little bit of a deep dive into the architecture of any given space when I'm leading them through the
There
city.
is
But
some pretty amazing architecture in New York, I have to say. There really is. And I just wanted to just jump in here and say you are ticking all my boxes right here. I'm an author, I'm a psychic, I'm a medium, and I'm a paranormal investigator. And so you are like ticking every box I have with these books. And I look forward to more chats with you because
thank you.
you have so much great information, and I love listening to you. I love hearing what you have to say about that. But I'm going to kind of redirect you here
Sure.
to um, the Winchester House.
Speaking of
I really,
architecture.
yeah, great, crazy architecture, and on the other coast.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's that Andrea and I, being New York City ghost tour guides, um, we were approached by an editor who took one of my tours, and she said, "I love your fiction, but I really think your passion for this kind of stuff, we need to put that passion into some nonfiction about this." And so I was like, "Hey, Andrea, let's do a book." And so we were initially pitching just New York stories because that's our foremost expertise,
Right.
even though her and I both have lots of experience in other haunted spaces. But when Kensington was talking about this book, the publisher said, "We would really like, if you're comfortable, to expand it to other haunted locations. You get to choose which ones." And so I said, I want the Winchester Mystery House." And
Yes.
so I traveled out there and met with the house historian, Janan Boehm. She's a wonderful woman who gave me access to some things that aren't usually on display. Took an entire day with me to walk me around the Winchester Mystery House and to tell me some of the real story about Sarah Winchester. And so that became my mission with my chapter. It's the longest chapter I've written because I would have gone longer, but my editor actually pulled back some of the biographical information of Sarah Winchester because she said, "This is not a biography of Sarah Winchester. This is twice as long as the rest of your chapters." And I'm like, "I know, but she's so interesting and there's so much to say." But the common especially because we're interested in kind of course correcting ways in which narratives have gotten away from themselves.
Hmm.
And the Winchester Mystery House narrative really has lost the thread of Sarah's sanity. She was in fact very sane. The narrative is that she, after losing her husband, after losing her baby girl, and she lost so many people in very rapid succession in the 1880s. And the narrative that was created, that was crafted, even during her lifetime, is that she'd seen a Boston spiritualist who said, "You have to go west and you have to keep building a house to appease the spirits of those killed by the Winchester rifle, which is where she made all of her money. She was one of the wealthiest women in the world. She would be a billionaire today by the millionaire status. She inherited $8 million in the money in the currency of 1888. So the money on that is just in that. That was one
Wow.
chunk. That's $500 million
Hmm.
in today's currency, and that was only one part of what her inheritance was. She had no idea what to do with all of that money. And so she never weighed in one way or another how she felt about the Winchester rifle. It was a gun that her father-in-law had purchased and refined in hopes that he was going to get a Union contract during the Civil War to supply the Winchester rifle to the Union soldiers, as he believed in the
Okay.
Union cause. And that didn't end up happening, but it did become a very popular gun. It was sort of became kind of the gun that won the West was sort of its tag, and that was a complicated issue, especially for Native Americans dealing with Western expansion. And Native Americans did pick up that Winchester rifle. They would use it in a lot of their battles because they called it, some tribes would call it the spirit gun because it kept firing.
Hmm.
And so this mythos of the Winchester rifle, it kind of our own American anxiety with gun and gun culture becomes, even in the 19th century, placed on this woman and her choices. So she goes west, she buys a farmhouse, she leaves her hometown of Connecticut because it's just full of memories of loss, and she tries to kind of restart herself in quiet. She's an introvert, she's very kind, she doesn't want a high spectacle life. She doesn't like the high society gossip. She just wants to be left alone. So she goes out west and she buys a farmhouse, and she loves architecture. She's sort of an amateur architect. So she just starts scribbling little designs on scrap paper and handing them to workmen because she loved supporting artisans, and her father was a cabinet maker, and so she loved woodworkers and she loved having them around. And so
Love
she
it.
recreated a family of artisans, and she basically wanted to have sort of her own dollhouse. She managed it on a lifelike scale. She didn't have formal training, so not everything makes sense in the Winchester Mystery House, but she loved paying workers twice the going rate of any employer in California to build something beautiful and to keep building. Not because of it necessarily an obsession. Was it eccentricity? Yes. Was it madness? Absolutely not. She was actually a very shrewd businesswoman, as any of her accountants would tell you. And she really loved just providing. And so a lot of the expansions onto the Winchester house are because she wanted to give her staff really luxurious living quarters and relaxing quarters and sort of like break rooms and things like that. She did host her family, her remaining family, a lot in that house, but um, she never threw lavish parties, and that was part of why the elite wanted to create narratives about her, because they wanted access to that wealth. And they wanted to be a part of one of the richest women in the world's sphere. And she, as an introvert, suffering from rheumatoid arthritis, and so she was very concerned about her appearance. She was a bit of a recluse, and because into this void where she never really said one way or another about whether she was into spiritualism, and she didn't say one way or another about her thoughts about the Winchester rifle. All these narratives were so easily crafted about her. And the only time she ever refuted anything in a newspaper was when a conservative politician said that she'd endorsed him, and she wrote to the paper to say she had done no such thing.
Good for
And
her.
I mean, it was just this amazing thing of like that was the
Yeah.
one. All the rest of the various rumors or whatever, she didn't say one way or another. But she has this curious, fascinating house that's full of light. I thought it was going to be really claustrophobic. It's not. It's full of light. It's full of strange turns, yes. And doors that lead to nowhere, yes, because she didn't actually rebuild after the 1908 earthquake leveled the top floors of the house. She decided not to rebuild, and that also was for California elite of that time. They felt that was a slap in the face to their values of rebuilding, and so the fact that she wasn't going to rebuild her top stories, she was going to let them go. The Winchester mansion was not her only house, and she just decided not to worry about those extra floors. So yeah, some of the doors go to nowhere because the rest of the house fell off.
Oh, well, that
So
makes sense.
it's that, but that doesn't make as exciting of a narrative.
No.
So, but here's where the interesting thing about sort of spectral tourism comes in, and here's where it's sort of that push and pull between the dynamic of making up a story, um, who's right and who's wrong in this. Because while I don't want Sarah Winchester to be continually maligned by these notions that she was crazy, she wasn't. She was very generous. She gave millions of dollars in amounts that we'll actually never know, because a lot of it times were she would give anonymously. Um, but a year after her death, um, no one knew what to do with the house because she didn't will the house to anyone. She willed the contents to her niece, Daisy Merriman, to auction off. And the house itself, she didn't name to anybody. And because it was so curious and not all of it was finished, and it didn't have, it had such quirk to it. It's 160 rooms that don't all connect. And so the legal assessor said it was of no value because they didn't know what value to ascribe to it. So it's
Right.
going to be torn down. It was going to be torn down. Into this mix steps John Brown, who ran an amusement park. And he was like, you know what? The Mystery House at one of my amusement parks is one of the most popular attractions. So here we have this ready-made, curious, mysterious place that people have been saying is full of a narrative of a mad woman pursued by ghosts. They'd been saying this during her lifetime. It was a ready-made narrative. So he opened the Winchester Amusement Company a year after Sarah Winchester's death and codified the legend in people who he led through a haunted house. The house is haunted, yes, but it is haunted less by the jump scares or the madness. It is not haunted by that. It's haunted by the spirits of those who loved Sarah and loved that house and are still caretaking for it. So the house is haunted by caretakers who spent their lives rather happily in that beautiful place. And that doesn't make for as much of a Disney haunted mansion scary moment. So even though the ball, by the way, the ballroom of the Winchester Mystery House did influence and inspire the ballroom of of Disney's Haunted Mansion. It does have all this great spectral history in this regard, but this particular chapter illuminates our hope in trying to get to the heart of how are we talking about these women, and how, in which cases did the narrative get away from them and was
Right.
spun completely false for a particular agenda. In this case, I kind of can't blame John Brown, because I'm really glad that the building still exists, and it exists because he turned it into an amusement park.
Right.
So
I have been in the haunted house at Disney World in
yep.
Florida, and it kind of cracks me up because at the time when I went, oof, almost 30 years ago now, I took my young son, who
Yeah.
was like, I think he was 8 at the time, and he was all like shaking about going into the haunted house.
Mm,
And I'm looking at this building, being who I am, and going, there's not one haunted thing about that building.
right. No.
Absolutely nothing haunted. And I kept trying to explain that to him, and he's like, no, it's a haunted house. It's a haunted house. And I said, you know what? There's no actual ghosts in that house. If you want the actual ghost, you go to the teacup ride, because that's where they are.
Yep.
Only I said it loud and a little louder than intended, and a bunch of people like, what?
Oh, I love that.
But
I
we'd already
love
been on
that.
the teacup ride, so I saw them there, right? Because that's where they
Yeah.
are. They're around the original Disney rides. And I didn't mean to
Yep.
like totally derail the subject, but
Love that, though.
yeah, it was
But you're
just
right.
kind of
Anyone
funny.
who is anyone who's energy sensitive or sensitive to spirits,
Mhm.
it there's a whole other part of the crafting of ghost lore
Right,
that we are kind of in the interesting business of. We don't want to be a we don't want to be a spoil sport, and we don't want to
right.
be a buzzkill. And this book is not a buzzkill. I don't do that in my
No.
work because I'm really interested in the history. So it's like the passion for the subject matter comes through regardless. But
Oh,
I would rather tell the
absolutely.
truth about it. I would rather tell the truth about, no, this building is haunted and we can't explain it, and we don't know exactly what happened. Here's what we do and we don't know. And I do
Mhm.
say at the Winchester House, Mystery House, the building is haunted. It's just not haunted in the way that people think. It's kind of
Yeah.
pleasantly haunted, and people want to craft a narrative of terror. And that's just, for me, not actually how a lot of ghost lore has worked for me. A lot of my ghost lore that I've experienced has actually been funny and kind of fond.
It is. It is. It's being someone who talks to spirits for a living, basically,
Right.
right? That's what I do.
Yeah.
Most of them are funny.
Yeah.
They come through, they crack jokes,
Yes.
and the ones that make me swear so that their family knows it's them, they're the funniest
Oh,
because
that's delightful.
sometimes I'm in situations where it's like, "Well, I gotta kinda whisper this because this isn't really, like, the place
Right, right,
for this
right,
type
but
of language," but, sometimes that's the only way that they can really get through to the people I'm talking to that it's them.
yep, yep,
Certain quirky phrases, certain ways of doing things, I have a few people in my life who have passed on who are constantly moving my stuff
yes,
because they think it's funny that I can't find
yes.
stuff.
The practical jokers,
Jokers,
more often
yes.
than not. That's been my consistent experience is having
Mhm.
things moved I've worked in many different haunted locations around this nation, and my things being moved when no one else was in the room, has been the most consistent thing that's happened. Um,
Absolutely, yes,
and
I
yeah,
agree.
and every n and clear audience for me. I don't necessarily see things as much as I'll kind of sense things. I'll feel things in that way that the sixth sense has you feel it in a way that you can't ascribe to any other sense. You're like, I don't know
Right,
how I know this, but I know that there is something over there because I can't
yes,
see it and I don't s- taste anything or I don't, and I don't hear anything or whatever. You just have a sense.
right.
And I think a lot of people have that gift. We were talking before we started recording about how this stuff is trained out of people, but everybody has a capacity to
Yes,
tune that sixth sense if they wanted to about
right,
feeling and seeing in different ways. That third eye
right,
thing, opening that up.
right.
And it's not
And
something I would recommend to everybody, but
right, but this is
everybody's
where we
different.
plug my book.
Yeah, please do. See, you like how I
Right.
served that up for
Yeah,
you?
thank you, thank you. So we
I'm
we
so glad.
we have Leanna's and Andrea's book, The Haunted History of Invisible Women: True Stories of American Ghosts, and then we have my level 1 intuitive use psychic and personal development book. And it's available everywhere, including on my website. So, but it was just really interesting how we kind of weaved this stuff together. And we had a really
Yeah,
interesting conversation before we even started
right.
recording. And so, I really have been enjoying this so much. I don't want this to end.
Well, this we'll just have to come back and talk more
We'll
because
just have to do it
I knew
again.
from yeah,
Yeah.
I knew from the moment that we first started talking that I could just talk to you for hours. Because yeah, you were open about these things that I feel are a part of everyday experience, and I love that you have a guide that can really address the universality of intuition
Yes.
that all of us are gifted with. It is all of us have this capacity, and I don't like people who gatekeep it because I just don't think that's right. I think that this is, you know, spirituality of any kind is an open road that everyone has to find their own way in,
Agreed.
and we also are very careful to not tell anybody what to believe in our book. Andrea admittedly is more of a skeptic than I am. We're sort of I'm the Mulder, she's the Scully of the
Okay.
X-Files relationship in this. She's more the skeptic, and I'm the believer, mainly because I've just had more things announce themselves to me over the course of history. She's had her own uncanny experiences, and she tells them in the book,
Mhm.
and she does so with a level head, as do I, because I'm not
Mhm.
trying to lead. I'm not trying to force people to believe. I don't actually care if people are believers or not if they read this book because I want them to learn the history, and I
Right.
want them to ask the questions about how do we construct narratives for better for worse about some of these things. But I also want folks to feel like they can bring their own personal experience to bear. Um, what is difficult for me, admittedly, is when people push back against what I'm saying is my personal experience and saying, "Oh, that's I don't believe you." Okay, that's fine. You don't have to believe me necessarily, but you can't say I didn't experience the things that I experienced.
I have run into
Uh,
that as well.
I'm
Yeah.
sure you do.
Yeah, I have run into that as well, and even from a good friend who said that her husband doesn't believe in any of this stuff when I was talking about it, I said, "That's not my issue."
Right. Right.
He can believe or not believe whatever he wants to, that doesn't change my reality,
Correct. It does
you
not
know?
change my lived experience. And
Yeah,
so folks that want to lift up their own truth by tearing down others, that I can't abide by that.
I
But I
agree.
have to exist we are existing in a space where the paranormal, the psychic, the spiritual, can be a real flashpoint for some people, and they close down and they will lash out sometimes when they just don't want to deal with the unknown. I'm very comfortable with the divine mystery. My introduction section to the book is called existential questions because that's my favorite topic is existential
Yes.
questions. I don't have to have an answer to that, but I realize that not having an answer to what happens after we pass is very upsetting to a lot of people. Whereas
Yes.
I find go the spiritual realm, and ghosts are part of the spiritual realm, that they are spirits and they are spiritual. I find it all a great comfort. And that's what I try to bring into this is my love of these stories, that even if you don't believe that there is a spirit that has haunted this house, well then let's appreciate who this woman was when she was alive because she was fascinating. And
Yes.
that's, even if you don't need any bits about the ghost lore, okay, that's fine. Well then let's talk about the history. It's fine. Meet this where it is in any part of this. But I do find that, like, it's very helpful to be talking about spirits in the realm of a historical fact and historical context, because then it helps those folks who have a hard time with it latch onto something that is concrete in
Yes.
a world of variables.
Right. And I have to say, having delved into this book, you both cover the historical aspect with great accuracy and incredible storytelling. I mean, it's what for me, and I know for a lot of other people who went through public schools and learned history, they taught, this war, this war, this war, this war, and nothing in between.
Right.
Okay. But when history is approached from the aspect of humanitarianism, it's beautifully
Yes.
written. This is a
Thank you.
beautifully written book, and I highly recommend it to everyone. And I know that you put a link in the chat
I did.
to where people can find your book, and
Yeah, it's
it's
available wherever books are sold. It's available in paperback and in audiobook, wherever you like to get your audiobooks. And it is available at any independent bookstores. It is available across every single digital platform. I will say we have a lot of audiobook listeners who enjoy audiobooks, but then have gone and bought the paperback because the audiobook does not have any of our footnotes or any of our extensive bibliography. So we have tons of notes. We have a very large bibliography. So if you like the topics that we're talking about, hunt through our bibliography and go and create a new reading list that will help further illuminate some of these topics. We were very reliant on incredible biographers, incredible folks who have done wonderful work in both women's history as well as dealing with the complicated aspects of history. Taya Miles being one of our great resources, and all of her works about the difficulties of hauntings in locations in which enslaved Americans were tortured, and those kinds of difficult topics. We try to engage with the harder aspects, the very difficult and violent aspects of our nation's history. We try to address that with openness and with empathy and with an understanding of the fact that these are our nation's history is complicated, and we have to be able to sit in that complication. We have to be able to sit in those realities and be made uncomfortable. We have to be able to
yeah,
be made uncomfortable because history is uncomfortable, and those who want to whitewash everything and put rose-colored glasses on everything, they're just doing everyone a disservice because it's not the truth.
right, right,
So, to
exactly.
everyone who wants to strip any difficult stuff from historical classes, from educational environments, it's just that's the truth will out. The history will unfold, and the truth will continue to be told, and we want to be part of that, of the truth telling as best we know how. But here's the thing too, history's always changing. There was a
Yes.
document that the Merchant's House, which is we have a chapter about the Merchant's House, one of Andrea and I's favorite haunted houses in Manhattan. It's down on 4th Street, and it's haunted by Gertrude Treadwell, who lived 93 years in the same house. And she is in that house and she watches over that house. And we love Gertrude. And, but there's a narrative about why she remained a spinster. About Lewis Walton was a man that she had, who had been courting her, and she wanted to marry. The marriage was for some reason forbidden by her father, and we had thought is because she was Protestant and Lewis was Catholic, but then, and that was the narrative the merchant's house was even saying. And then something was revealed in their letters that revealed that Lewis Walton maybe was not a Catholic. And so now we're like, well, then what was the trouble with keeping these two apart, who neither one of them ever married, and they continued corresponding for the rest of their lives? So they were still, there was something there. What was it? But the fact that Gertrude didn't marry and kept this house in her name and kept the building exactly as Papa would have liked it, which is kind of a creepy thing. But in the case of a living time capsule from the 1870s when she died in the 1930s. It's this incredible scenario where her quirky choices allowed us to have a museum that gave a window into upper class Gilded Age Victorian society in New York at a
Wow.
time when everything else had moved far uptown. And it was this little insect trapped in amber, that Gertrude's specific choices kept for us. And she's now a famous ghost because she decided to stay in her own house and become a spinster. And that, so that narrative, but again, that's all. So our book came out, this bit of history was revealed afterwards, and the merchant's house even said, like, well, we got to figure out how we're going to talk about this narrative now. So hopefully we'll get like a second edition in a few years and say,
Yeah.
here's some of the history that's changed that we've found out since we first published this book. Just to illuminate the point that history is always changing. We're always
Right.
learning new things because so many marginalized narratives were suppressed or just not looked for, just not sought out
Yeah.
in a lot of historical settings. And historians broadly are doing a great job of trying to lift up some of the marginalized narratives that have been left out of some of those stories and try to say, hey, let's just have a bigger picture. That's all. That's all we're
Yeah.
looking for. It's a bigger picture here.
Absolutely. And if you look at even the bigger picture, where, and this is a totally different topic, and I just formulating here, but even archaeology worldwide is changing what we thought we knew about human history.
Right.
So yeah, it changes because we get more information. And you two have done a beautiful job of bringing forward more information. And I want to thank you, and I want to thank you for your time because our time is unfortunately up. But people can check out your website at Leanna Renee Hieber. That's Hieber for those of you who are not watching a video.com. So it's Leanna Renee Hieber. Excellent.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
Thank you for your time and your openness and your gifts and your book. And for you trying to make all of this accessible for people as well. I think that that's the thing that we're so mutual in our approach of wanting
Yes.
this topic to be one that we can all talk about openly, and graciously, with the idea of there's always something else to learn and there's always something else to know.
Mhm.
And I'm excited to keep doing that, both in terms of what we're publishing and also the conversations that we're having. So thank you for
Yeah.
this.
Thank you. It's been a great topic, great conversation. Can't wait to have you back.
Can't wait to come
All
back. Thanks
right.
again.
And everyone, you are listening to Paramystic Christina on Zone 5 Radio. And I look forward to seeing you again. Thanks. Bye.